Hello and welcome to episode 213 of Retro Encounter, RPG fans' weekly podcast of many topics. I'm Mike Sollosi, and today I am joined with my podcast partner from the Wild Arms 3 episodes a little while ago, Joe Padilla.
Hello, how's it going? It's
going alright. Today we're here to talk about Vagrant Story, and I wish I had played more of Vagrant Story in the past couple weeks, Joe. I had some issues with illness and busy with work and other things, so I'm only a couple hours in, so I'm afraid you're going to have to carry me this episode.
That's alright, I got you.
Alright, cool. But anyway, Vagrant Story is a game that we had been floating around as an idea for a while, and in part because I was really eager to try it for the first time. I have owned a copy of Vagrant Story for probably 12 years at least. I think when I was going crazy on eBay trying to buy every relevant PS1 RPG, that was one casualty in my bank account, and that this would have been in the mid-2000s sometime. But I had never really sat down and tried to play it, but I have a vivid memory of when I was in middle school or maybe my first year of high school, so early 2000s, that one of my friends had this game, and it was one of his favorite games, and he was trying to explain what was going on to me and another friend that hadn't played it before, and I was completely confused. And like looking back at it, I think he was fighting a lizard man enemy from in the castle basement area in the first couple hours.
Oh yeah, those guys are tough.
Yeah, so like he was trying to explain it because he was trying to explain to me what was happening, and I just was completely escaping it. But when this game came out in 2000, I was very, very into Square and all of its RPG oeuvre, and trying to play as many of them as I could. I bought a PlayStation for the first time in 1999, so this was exactly the right window for me to get into it. But I didn't buy it until much later, and never really tried to get into it on a playthrough on my own until now. So, Joe, what's your background with Vagrant Story, if any?
So this is another game like Wild Arms 3 that although it's a little different, I didn't know about Vagrant Story until probably about a year ago, at least by name. But when I was younger, I remember seeing the cover somewhere, that beautiful Yoshida artwork, and being just really drawn to it. And I know it might have been in a game store or something, and I was like, what is this? And it just went out of my mind. And then probably about a year ago, when hearing about this game, I had looked it up, and I was like, oh, that was the cover that I was so kind of obsessed with when I was a kid, and I was so wondering what it was. So that's really my background with it, is just I saw this image when I was a kid, and 15 years later I discovered what it was.
Right, and I'm maybe only a little bit more early informed than you on this, because again, this game sort of escaped me. It looked and felt baffling to me when I first saw it in, say, 2000 or 2001. But I was aware of it as a Square RPG, and I knew I liked those. But one follow-up question, Joe. Have you played Final Fantasy Tactics or Final Fantasy 12 before? And then this will be relevant, I promise.
Mm-hmm. Yep, I know where you're going with this. I haven't played 12, but yeah, I played Tactics a few months ago, the War of the Line version on PSP. So. Oh
yeah, that definitely counts. Okay, so again, you do see where I'm going with this. Now, Vagrant Story was developed by Yasumi Matsuno and a lot of his team that was, I guess, you would call the former Quest team, that worked on Ogre Battle and Tactics Ogre, and then was acquired by Square, and then worked on Final Fantasy Tactics. In fact, like the first Tactics Ogre game is sometimes even called Final Fantasy Tactics 0 for how similar it is to Final Fantasy Tactics in look and feel. But Vagrant Story, FF12, and FF Tactics are ostensibly set in the same world, usually called Ivalice, or even the Ivalice Alliance at times. And I did some background research into this because sometime after being confused by this game for the first time, I was aware that it was an overarching connected series. And that made me more interested in it because I adore Final Fantasy Tactics and appreciate FF12. With apologies to Caitlin, it's not one of my favorites in the series. But doing some background research, and this will not surprise you, but the discourse around this game has really looked into every possible tie into Ivalice. Vagrant Story isn't exactly tied into the main story of FF Tactics or FF12. It may or may not be set in Ivalice. There's sort of conflicting interviews and information on that, and it doesn't fit into the timeline neatly in any way that I was able to find clearly in materials surrounding this game. But what is definitely true is that it's set in a fictional kingdom of Valendia and references events and place names in the Ivalice Alliance, but probably isn't canon within that storyline. You could even call the Ivalice raid in Final Fantasy XIV a similar thing. It's like there's Ivalice connections and place names in common, but it's not in that story proper. I think what they were trying to do here was they wanted a story with a Gothic setting, and well, not a Gothic setting, more like a Gothic atmosphere set in a medieval castle world of castles and cathedrals, like FF Tactics. But they wanted to capture the fantasy of like a political operator and like sort of a secret agent instead of a commander of armies, the way that you feel in Final Fantasy Tactics or Tactics Ogre. So, Vagrant Story has Ivalice connections, is not Ivalice proper, definitely weird and unique feeling among Square RPGs of the 2000s.
Absolutely, and it's kind of hard to place it because most of the plot, which we'll go into later, takes place within the span of a day. So it's like it's hard, it's difficult to know where exactly that could slot in any sort of Ivalice history because it's just a 24-hour stretch basically.
And it's set in the same walled city as well, right?
Yeah, Le Mans. I'm not very good with French, but I think that's how it's pronounced.
I'm okay with French, so I think it's Le Monde.
Le Monde. Okay.
Yeah, Monde. Because remember, the last word the last letter in every French word, unless it's a vowel or C, F, R, and L, is basically always silent. So the D would be pronounced, but the E wouldn't. So Le Monde.
Yeah.
If they dropped the A in Leia, it would be Le Monde, which is the world.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, like it does represent it does resemble a like French Bastille city. Which 20 years later makes me think of East 9, but it entirely within one city, entirely taking place in one day. This is not a world-spanning dungeon town RPG, and I mentioned that it fulfills the fantasy of like being a secret agent in a way, and I mean that in two ways. First of all, this is basically a solo game. You're controlling Ashley Riot, who is a risk breaker, which is a great combination of two English words, and Ashley is the only character you're controlling the entire game, and is a solo operator as a risk breaker. He represents the VKP, which I forget what that stands for. It's Valendia something.
It's Valendia Knights of something.
Valendia Knights of the Peace. I just
Yes.
found it. So like he and the VKP represent sort of large interests within Le Monde and within Valendia being the larger region, I think. And basically, the very first scene of the game, there's sort of a council sitting around a table telling Ashley what his mission is, and there's people that represent the Templars, which are like the military arm of the church, and the church proper, and I think local government. So the VKP are like a special task force, or maybe even an espionage force to do very high risk even, or like sort of dirty work for those large interests, which again is like an RPG where you're like a secret agent working behind the scenes with a game that has political machinations like Final Fantasy Tactics, which is a game that has a lot of politics going on in the text of the story and in the background of the story. And I think that's cool. Like, they wanted a setting like Final Fantasy Tactics, but with sort of the politics and the atmosphere of Final Fantasy Tactics, but instead of being a commander of armies, you're a behind-the-scenes secret agent. I think that, and I'm repeating myself a little bit, but I think that fantasy or that premise is really cool. Like, if you sort of decide to suspend disbelief enough and invest yourself in the world early on in this game, Vagrant Story is like feels cool from the beginning.
It's extreme. I feel like it's extremely engrossing. I feel just very kind of very enthralled by this world that's been built. Even though, yeah, as you said, it's not, going town to town, dungeon to dungeon. It's got this gothic claustrophobia to it that I think is fantastic.
Yeah, and then you become less engrossed the moment that you start a fight. And we will get into the combat, into the story, but I want to keep talking around some of the stuff surrounding this game first. This was a little bit of an awkward time visually for video games, and I mean every genre of video games. It came out in 2000, and so it was still using PlayStation polygons, but I mean N64 and PlayStation polygons have not aged great. Because you sort of have shape without texture, and sometimes less than sophisticated angles and technology really trying to punch above their weight. I remember thinking this game looked amazing in 2000, but now it's like just like the lack of detail on people's faces sort of gives you a handsomest guy in the room kind of vibe.
That is true, but for the time though, I mean, when you're comparing this to other games from that time in terms of the expressiveness of the faces and the fact that all the other Square games at this time were either using 2D characters with 3D backgrounds or 3D characters with 2D backgrounds. Yep. And this one's a fully 3D character and a fully 3D environment, and it's pretty remarkable.
Talking about other Square games with 2D on 3D or 3D on 2D, 2000 was a really busy, interesting year for Square. They were for over a year. They had been advertising the summer of 2000 as the summer of adventure, and they came out with something like 4 RPGs in the summer of 2000, and then another 4 in winter spring before then. Vagrant Story came out in May of 2000 in North America, and in that following summer, so I'm not sure if you count Vagrant Story as being part of the Summer of Adventure or not, but then within the next 3 or 4 months afterwards in North America, Chrono Cross, Legend of Mana, Final Fantasy IX, and Threads of Fate all came out, and I think Front Mission 3 and a couple other games that I'm forgetting were also released in that window, sort of spring-summer 2000, which just makes for a very dense year of some diverse and weird games. And Legend of Mana is one of those 2D sprites on a 3D background games you mentioned, and Final Fantasy IX is one of those 3D sprites on or 3D models on a 2D background games that you mentioned. And in fact, I think that the sort of the hand-drawn backgrounds in FF9 are among the prettiest I ever remember in sort of this era. So this game came out at a busy time, and I was definitely more focused on Chrono Cross and FF9 in 2000, which is part of why I sort of skipped over this game during its release window. But it uses 3D models that looked great in 2000. And the sort of the dark castles and basements and catacombs do give you a claustrophobic, oppressed feeling that it was effective. I mean, at times this game feels like you're moving around in a horror game, especially when you're doing terrible crate pushing puzzles. some of it has not aged great. Like I mentioned, the textures in certain areas, especially people's faces, and I don't love how Ashley and really all of the characters have very broad shoulders and small waists because they want to show body definition, but just end up looking a little bit like, action figures at unusual proportions, when you could tell they were going for some level of photorealism for character movement and how the characters look, but don't really hit the mark. Vagrant Story is a really weird one, and like I mentioned, that Riskbreaker was a weird combination of two English words. Vagrant Story really felt like they went into a Japanese English dictionary and thesaurus to come up with two nouns that sound cool next to each other.
Yeah, I'm really trying to figure out where exactly Vagrant is part of this game. I mean, there's no mention of Ashley Riot's being homeless or anything of
I think
that sort, really, but
I think they wanted I think they wanted to come up with a word that evoked Ashley's loner status, like not loneliness, but sort of like operating as a solo actor.
Yeah,
is my guess, because I've mentioned espionage and I've definitely mentioned RPGs. It's kind of hard to pin down a single genre on Vagrant Story. It is an action role playing game with that does pause the action at times, but like, I mean, I hesitate to call it an action RPG or a turn-based RPG, because it really blends elements of both. And I read in one article, I don't know if it was a Wikia article or a story on the game. At one point, they were intending this to be a party-based game with more than one character, or at least AI companions for Ashley, but they weren't able to implement it how they wanted to. So it is basically a solo game from start to finish. But I mean, you move from a third-person perspective with a fixed camera, and then you switch between you can switch into first-person perspective when you press start, and during action that you sort of pause to focus on enemies for attacking. It'll take a while to explain this battle system in completion, but let's at least give a full faith effort here. Like when you first had to enter battle mode and target enemies, which I think is against 3 soldiers, like right at the beginning of the game when he's sneaking into the Duke's manor. Mm-hmm. Like, what were your early impressions on the battle system, and as it got more complicated, how did your opinion change? Because I'm certain that you start to develop feelings about this battle system.
You certainly do. So at first I was deeply confused. This battle system is very unique. I don't think I've really seen anything quite like it. Like, I think it has some similarities to Chrono Cross, but not really. So at first I was deeply confused by what exactly I was supposed to be doing. As the game's gone on, though, I actually like the combat quite a bit. It develops this really kind of fun rhythm of chaining attacks and balancing out risk, and it's a really fascinating system, and it's sometimes really frustrating, and you're not sure why exactly things aren't going your way in combat, but the ambition that they were seeking out with this, I think, is something to be applauded, at least. And I'm actually having some fun with it, so...
Ambitious is definitely an appropriate adjective for this battle system. I haven't really hit that point yet. I'm still struggling almost every encounter, but I can see how, like, sort of once you have maybe more DP and PP and sort of more developed weapons at your disposal, it probably gets better. I should mention I am using a guide for this game for the most part, because I'm just terrified of being able to not finish it in time, like what happened with Wild Arms 2 months ago. And it felt like the guide was being defensive, or even like preemptively apologizing when it was explaining the battle system, like in sort of a it feels bad now, but it won't be so bad later kind of kind of tone. There's a lot going on here. There's a system of risk, which you mentioned, where basically Ashley's risk increases with every action, whether you defend or land a hit or trigger a trap or anything. Basically, risk is always increasing with your actions, and as your risk increases, your hit rate lowers and you take more damage. It motivates you to end encounters decisively and as quickly as you can, so your risk doesn't get so high that it cripples you. And there's also a system of chain attacks which allow you to deal a lot of damage at once and end battles quickly without your risk getting out of control. And now I'm not totally sure about this, but the best way to reduce risk is that there's a couple items that'll do that, but also you can just sort of wait.
Yeah, if you keep your weapon out, it goes down pretty slowly, but if you sheath your weapon and just kind of run around for a little bit, it goes down pretty quickly.
Yeah, I was, in some early fights I would struggle and my risk seemed to be unsustainably high, so I would sheath my weapon and then, go and make a sandwich or something, because it seems that waiting between encounters to reduce your risk and heal yourself a little bit is tedious but effective to a degree. And outside of risk, we should mention there, like when you sheath and unsheath your weapon, you're sort of going from movement mode or like normal mode into battle mode. And when your weapon's unsheathed, a sort of like a 360 sphere of range based on your weapon appears, and it allows you to target nearby enemies and even the parts of nearby enemies, like whether you attack an enemy's body or hand or head, it will have different properties and different levels of effectiveness. And all of these like attacking and enemy type and affinities are all taken into account. What kind of weapon you're using, where you're attacking the enemy, the elemental affinity of your weapon and the enemy, and the type of enemy it is, because I forget, there's 6 or 7 enemy types that include like ghost and dragon and human. Mm-hmm. And all of those factors factor into how effective your attack is. And again, I hope I'm not repeating myself too much, this game layers so many systems on top of systems in its combat that I don't know, like it was definitely ambitious, but I think maybe a little bit overexcited. Like I'm imagining a developer in some planning meeting going, and there'll be weapon types and enemy types and weapon affinities and body parts targeting, and like they just threw so much junk into this battle system with aplomb that I felt like it got in the way of me understanding the combat and enjoying the combat, at least very early on.
Yeah, definitely. I was not having too much fun with it early on, and this might be a system that people just don't really get into. With I think a lot of this was probably Matsuno's doing, because with tactics, I've kind of heard that he was going a little overboard with even more systems in tactics, and then Hiroyuki Ito was the battle planner, and he was like, okay, I want to make this fun. It's going to be fun, and you're going to like it. And I don't think he really had that for this game. So there are just many, many systems in this game that can be kind of alienating. But at least there's no zodiac signs.
Yeah, I mean, the first time I played FF Tactics, I basically completely ignored zodiac signs, which you can do, but mm-hmm. But I mean, again, your sign versus the enemy zodiac sign is a difference between, dealing 30% more or 30% less damage in FF Tactics. And for Vagrant Story, it has all these layered enemy type elemental affinity systems, but I don't feel like you can ignore them like you can zodiac signs in FF Tactics, because if you're attacking something inefficiently or don't have the appropriate weapon or element for a battle situation, you'll just be dealing one damage over and over until either you or the enemy is grinded into a pulp. Because
Yep.
there's also weapon customization in this game. Like you can find a sword or a mace and customize it a little bit, but the more you attack with it, and the more you attack with a certain affinity, the elemental affinity of the weapon will increase, and its opposite affinity will decrease. So if you let's say you attack a bunch of fire enemies in a row. The fire affinity of your weapon will increase significantly, and its water affinity will decrease. And if you don't pay attention to that, you could be in some terrible situation where you have no good weapons to attack an earth affinity enemy, or similar situations like that. It's you have to balance and manage so many different things that I was trying to, keep my edged weapons attacking humans and beasts, and my blunt weapons attacking undead, and so on. And the affinities of those would sort of basically fit a pattern, and that seems to be working okay for me so far. But if you aren't aware of all of those things I mentioned, elemental affinity, weapon type, enemy type, customizing your weapons with the proper grips and blades or mace heads, as it were, if you aren't paying attention to all of those things, you could be really crippled or worked into a bad corner with how you're building Ashley and your arsenal.
Yeah, I'm currently in kind of one of those spots right now where I'm pretty decently far into the game, and I'm at a boss where I'm only doing a few damage, but it's a similar type boss to one that I was doing, pretty good damage to before. So I'm a little confused as to what that is. So I just went to a forge and made a big, massive axe that I named the Ball Buster, and I'm gonna go back in and see what happens with that.
I have a sword that I named Swordy McSwordface, but I couldn't. but I couldn't fit it all the way, so I had to remove a couple of vowels to fit an appropriately understandable Swordy McSwordface in there, and a mace that I named Jack Johnson. So far, Swordy McSwordface and Jack Johnson are doing okay for me, but at times you will find an enemy that you don't have exactly the right kind of weapon to deal with, and that is when you have to go back to a forge and figure things out. And because there's so many things to consider in the combat in this game, it gets really cumbersome. And I think thinking about how defensive this guide that I'm reading is like if you know what to anticipate in advance and build your arsenal a certain way, the combat can go more quickly, but you're really, I think the player is at odds with the combat more so than the combat allowing the player to be at odds with enemies. I feel like I'm not only wrestling with enemies, I'm wrestling with the combat system in general. And it's sometimes in RPGs the combat system is a fun puzzle to figure out, and but in this time it feels like an obstacle. And in RPGs that I really like, the combat feels fast and fluid, and it feels like I'm powerful and coming up with good combinations or even exploitative strategies. But this one feels like I have to figure out the combat to do anything, and instead of fighting the enemies, I'm fighting the systems. Am I being unfair, or is this combat as bothersome as I'm worried it might be later?
Oh no, you were being completely fair. I went to a forge when I was playing a couple of days ago, and somehow combined two axes and got a crossbow. So yeah, it's not terribly sensical at times, and the combat itself can be pretty tedious. Like I spent a half hour fighting a dragon early on in the game, which was not fun at all. What I see as a big problem with it is that because the combat can be so slow and things can be spread out so much, you go for long stretches without getting bits of the story, which is what I most want to see out of the game.
Yeah, speaking of not getting to bits of the story, we have not gone beyond the first cutscene in about 30 minutes of recording time.
Well,
we'll get to it, but we got to stick to it for a minute.
Yeah. Well, part of it is that there was an interview with Matsuno where he said that they had to cut like 50% of the scenario for this for the game, and there really isn't a whole lot of. There's a whole lot to think about, and there's a whole lot to chew on. But in terms of actual story and cutscenes, there really isn't that much in this game, and so I think they really could have put in more of the story and taken some of the combat out, because at the point I'm at, it's been a few hours since I've seen a cutscene or anything that's advancing the story besides environmental storytelling.
Yeah, I think this was maybe intended to be part one of a multi-part story, because like when you even hit the opening sort of cutscenes, or maybe this was a detail in a manual or something, it said Vagrant Story, The Phantom Pain, Prelude to Story of the Wanderer. Like, well, like it suggests that the Ashley Riot story is a sort of a grander thing, and this one-day event is sort of what launches Ashley into a larger adventure. But we never get that larger adventure.
No, we do not. We might be getting it with Unsung Story, which, and I don't know if you've looked into that at all, but
wait, that isn't the one that Matsuno was involved with? That was a failed Kickstarter, was it?
Something like that, but it's the official word on it is that it's still in development and it's coming out in 2020. But in terms of that actually being reality, I'm not sure. I believe...
No, this is the one I was thinking of. I was doing some background Googling. There was it was a 2014 Kickstarter that got over $500,000 in contributions, but then basically went radio silent for a couple years, and then in 2016, the developer Playdeck announced that development had been stopped. They had sort of refocused development, and it even changed genres. And it looks like it is going to. They are planning to release it in 2020, but it's unclear, like how much Matsuno and Yoshida and that crew is involved, and unclear exactly what the focus of the game is anymore. But it was a Kickstarter disaster in the 2014-2016 range that we are unclear on what its current status is. But you think this might be a serious new attempt to tell this story again, or continue this story?
It could be. I mean, the name definitely draws it. The name definitely draws you to it, and the fact that, in terms of like the core team of Matsuno's there in some capacity, Yoshida's there in some capacity. I don't know about Sakimoto, who did the sound for this.
Yeah, Sakimoto's attached to Unsung Story as well.
Oh, he is. Yeah,
at least from early information. I don't know anything about Unsung Story other than the controversy surrounding the crowdfunding.
I don't think anyone does, really. So it's very much unknown. But I would like to see the continuation of this story or something alongside it. Something else with the story that I noticed is the cinematography during the cutscenes.
Yes, is
really strong.
I think that's the most forward-thinking part of the entire visual presentation of Vagrant Story. Like, in the opening cutscenes, like, you'll see having action taking place in the foreground, main plane, and background, with rotating around spots, or like the opening credits interspersed with action, with Ashley sneaking into the castle gates. There is real thought put into the camera work and cinematography. And when you run into Sydney for the first time, like the camera sort of languishes over him in a way that's like this is better than the camera zooming over Sephiroth in Final Fantasy VII. They really put thought into into camera positioning and cinematography for this game, which is almost comical with this smart camera work over these year 2000 polygons.
True, but
saying it feels wasted is too harsh, but like it's a juxtaposition.
Yeah, it definitely is, but but I can't think of a game released before this or around its time that had this type of cinematic sweep to it. It's pretty interesting.
I mean, let's see, this is say around 2000. I'm struggling as well. Like I'd have to enter, I don't know, maybe Metal Gear Solid 2 territory.
Yeah.
Maybe like the most dramatic best parts of a Final Fantasy IX. I remember being sort of surprised at how weird the character models looked, and then also simultaneously surprised at how smart and cool the camera movement is.
Mm-hmm.
I don't love the fixed camera perspective when you're walking around a wine cellar in the castle basement or something, but that's a problem that I've had with video game cameras basically from the introduction of 3D to the present day. So I can't get too upset about that for a 2000 game having a sometimes awkward action camera.
True.
But maybe we should start talking about the story about this game about 35 minutes into the podcast. You start out with that meeting of the minds I mentioned, where basically some bigwigs are instructing Ashley on his mission, which is to sneak into the Duke's estate in Le Monde, where there's a hostage situation taking place, where a cult leader has the entire household taken hostage, but it appears that the Duke, whose household it is not present and might even be a supporter of the cult. So, like right away, you're seeing, secret organization. Ashley's a risk breaker, acting as like a solo agent to thwart this hostage situation. And there's cults working against a more mainstream church, and the situation is trying to be diffused secretly. So it gives you this really cool espionage-flavored action in a gothic-flavored city, just in the first 5 minutes of the game. Ashley sneaks in, takes out some soldiers who are threatening to kill all the hostages, and pretty soon encounters several big players in a row.
Yeah, so he runs into Sydney Losterol? Is that, how's that sounding?
Yeah, I think it would be it looks like Los Tarot, but I think if it was totally French, it would be probably Los Tarots.
Los Tarots.
Yeah, but I really don't know what kind of language inflection they're going for this one.
Yeah, so I mean, I speak English and I come from knowing a little bit of Spanish, so French isn't really my strong suit. So apologies for any mispronounced words. But yeah, runs into Sydney, who is this kind of wiry, bare-chested, mechanical hands cult leader.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we could talk a lot about the fashion choices in this game too. I'm surprised that at the level of covering up Ashley does too. He wears what appears to be like a shirt that is kind of like a tube top, because he has his shoulders, arms, and upper chest all exposed. I don't even know where this is going with the fashion choices in this game. Sydney, definitely a major player. Feels like a major antagonist from the early going on, but I'm not exactly sure if he's really the final antagonist or the final boss, but definitely makes an early impression visually.
Absolutely. He just seems to be kind of oozing, instilling fear in you. There's something that's kind of surreal about him. which I think is really fascinating and kind of continues on. He's very mysterious.
Yeah, and he's the leader of a cult, which feels evil at the beginning. I'm not sure if maybe the cult is okay and the church is the real villain at the end, because I mean this is a late '90s, early 2000s RPG after all. But there's also a woman named Callow who is sort of introduces Ashley, and like they make contact at the beginning of the game, and she gives him some intel to work on, and she gets captured very, very early. And there's also a sort of a knights captain named Guildenstern and another risk breaker named Rosencrantz, which is, for the Shakespeare fans out there, a nice wink, who are also trying to stop Sydney. These characters are all sort of having parallel motives, but I don't think they are intended to work well together.
In a lot of games, you have this sort of binary, these are the good guys, these are the bad guys. This is really murky stuff. As far as I am into this game, I still don't really know where my sympathies lie, or what characters are reliable, which ones are absolutely lying through their teeth. They don't get a whole lot of time because, as we said, that the scenario was cut down quite a bit. But they don't really need a whole lot of time to kind of worm their way into your brain. They're very interesting characters.
Yeah, and I'm still pretty early, so I definitely haven't encountered all of the players yet. But what starts out as sort of political intrigue, I don't think it doesn't seem like it's going to spiral out of control into world-threatening stakes. But it definitely feels like serious shit is going down in Le Monde, and Ashley, sort of from a mission that he didn't necessarily ask for, is thrust into the middle of it.
Yeah, and I'm hoping that it does kind of stay somewhat contained in small stakes, because that was I really like Final Fantasy Tactics, but I wasn't as thrilled about the introductions of the demons and such in there. I mean, it kind of took this more political story and made it a bit more fantastical than I liked. I was kind of appreciating the small stakes political intrigue before it.
Yeah, that part of Final Fantasy Tactics feels more grounded than a lot of the fourth act of Final Fantasy Tactics. At the risk of turning this into another Final Fantasy Tactics podcast, I say another because we did 3 of them in 2015. It starts out as like you being caught into a side conflict, into a war, and ends up with Ramza being a player in the war and his former friend Delita manipulating both sides politically while rescuing a princess who's a political pawn between the multiple sides. Like, that part is much more interesting than a possible takeover from a secret organization summoning demons.
Exactly.
And in fact, that secret organization is the Temple Knights or Templars, which again is one political element in Vagrant Story, which makes me wonder if Vagrant Story is connected to other Evil East games in that way. But so, I mean, I think there's value in a big, huge story with big stakes, and also value in a story that feels more grounded and more sort of true to its tone throughout. And I would be disappointed if Vagrant Story ends with every major character besides Ashley turning into a demon boss battle in the final act. And it may yet go that way. I truly don't know. I haven't been spoiled to much of the details of Vagrant Story. But where we are now with Ashley sort of pursuing these cult villains, and trying to defuse a hostage situation, and then sort of, I think, not hunting them down exactly, but at least trying to thwart what the cult is doing, is a good enough introduction that I am interested in continuing. And Ashley, maybe this is just a symptom of being a late 90s, early 2000s hero, is, I don't want to call him emo, but he's a little bit aloof. he has a sort of an "I work alone" kind of tone to him, and it's part of why he's a little bit callous to Callow early in the game.
Uh, and um, and he also is he's he's not prepared to bring her into battle because he mentions that she has no combat experience. So he's kind of like the being like the grizzled veteran who has to watch over the rookie.
Yeah, this again heavily suggests that article I read that said Vagrant Story was intended to be a game with multiple characters, or at least AI companions for Ashley, but then they eventually abandoned that. Like, Callow has, early suggestions of being a Gal Friday, but it never really happens.
Yeah, and they definitely moved far away from that because she's kind of the only one who feels like she could be a party member in the game.
I thought maybe that knight captain, what's his name, Guildenstern, felt like he could be a character like that. Like they clash early on, but maybe if their goals aligned later, he would be a party member later. Like, but these characters only give me feelings like that without it actually happening, because again, this is a solo RPG with a strange combination of rhythm gameplay and turn-based action when you enter combat. But at the very least, we're really jumping all over the place with this story. Like, I think that the setting and tone is really intriguing, and the early story and character moments are also intriguing, but the game is hamstrung a little bit by 3D awkwardness and this combat. But I don't dislike it. Like, I'm struggling with the combat a little bit, but Joe, I think you mentioned this to me off air, but this game is not a 60-hour epic. It's probably beatable in the 30 to 35-hour range.
Yeah, no, it's not too long. You're
Probably
not going to
probably
you're not
faster
going to
than,
lose your entire month to it.
probably faster than 30 hours if you know what you're doing, unlike you or I. But yeah, because I definitely don't know what I'm doing in this game. Again, I just, like, even with some regular encounters, like against lizardmen and that early dragon boss, I was just really struggling and wondering if I would actually ever be able to beat this game. Was there a single encounter, whether it's a boss battle or just in a more normal battle, that you just really struggled with, that made you sort of doubt your ability to continue?
Oh yeah, that boss battle that I mentioned versus the dragon that took like a half hour. Yeah, I mean, I felt like, hitting my skull into a wall because that's what it felt like I was doing in the game. Um, yeah, once I got through that, it was kind of like okay, I need to pay a bit more attention to crafting and try to figure out this game and try to have Ashley function like a Swiss Army knife of just a bunch of weapons on him that can take on any enemy. Um, it, but I think if you get into it a bit, I think it will start clicking with you, but it will take some time. And also just trying to find your way around can be kind of difficult too. The map takes some getting used to, but once you get the hang of the map, it's a really good map.
Yeah, I switch between the map view and the main view often because I would sort of lose myself in the background sometimes if the fixed camera third person view got a little weird. You understand what I mean by sort of getting lost in the screen a little bit?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, so the map view is a very, very good friend in Vagrant Story, and it's a struggle early on, but I'm encouraged that you say it gets easier as it goes on, with maybe just a couple stumbling blocks here and there, because again, this is cool. Like you can tell they're trying to create a setting like that of FF12 or FF Tactics, but with a different kind of game and a different kind of character than a disgraced noble leading a ragtag band of soldiers, or a city boy who dreams of becoming a sky pirate. Ashley's story is not like Vaughn's story or Ramza's story at all, but this was a setting that Matsuno has explored and continued to explore basically his whole career with Square, which has lasted for over 20 years right now. And if this game makes me appreciate the Ivalice raids in Final Fantasy XIV more, then absolutely, I welcome it.
Yeah. One thing as well with the... Have you been looking at the names of the rooms that you walk into?
Oh, some. Yeah. Do you have any standouts? Because I think you see them. You see the name of the room you're in when you go to the main menu or into the map view, right?
Yeah, it's... I don't have any particular standouts off the top of my head, but because each room in this game, and there are a lot of rooms, each one of them is named, and I think it's a really cool dynamic that they have. Kind of, they had to sacrifice having a less connected world by having these kind of small rooms to hold it all together.
Yeah, like sort of like every segment has its own name. Like when you go into the mines, I know there's like Desire's Passage, then Crossing of Blood, then Abandoned Cat's Paw.
Yes. Yeah,
and it's like each of these feels like a cool name of like a boss room in a Diablo game, except it's every single room in the game.
Yeah, all of them. Just like I'm trying to think of some of the ones that they had, but they're just really interesting and kind of give you a bit more to the story. And some of them are just downright terrifying. Like there's some that allude to just kind of the droll, terrible, almost slave labor that they have.
Yeah, this city, Leamond, is sort of has a lot of cool, beautiful architecture on the outside, but then there in the subsurface, there's mines and catacombs that were clearly hewed out by slave labor. Like the entire city is a beautiful veneer covering a dark underbelly, and a lot of the setting that you're exploring as Ashley, because you're sneaking around the underbelly of the city a lot, evokes that. And I mentioned earlier, sometimes this feels like a horror game from just from the oppressive atmosphere and the dark corridors and the fixed third person camera. And the challenging encounters that sometimes feel hopeless. Like this game feels more like a horror game than basically any other Square Enix game to my memory.
Yeah, it's a little Resident Evil in some way, but a lot more kind of terrifying.
And I don't know if I mentioned this in the podcast or not, because it's a topic I avoid. I don't love horror video games, but I think that's because horror games sort of take pride in taking control out of the player's hands and want the player to feel endangered or oppressed, and that's rarely a feeling I go to. I avoid. I don't love a lot of horror films either for basically the same reason. Like I don't want the feelings horror gives me a lot of the time. So getting a horror vibe from Vagrant Story early on made me think, oh, I don't know if I'm going to enjoy this. Oh boy. But again, that's a personal preference that is shared by very few people. I'm just not a horror guy a lot of the time.
That's fair. And I think a lot of the horror elements and the room names, a lot of it can be chalked up with Alexander O. Smith's localization.
Oh yeah, he's a brilliant localizer. Is he still working today? Because I haven't seen his name pop around recently, but
he last worked. I feel like he did some things recently. I can't remember.
His Wikipedia page is probably worth looking up, but I just think that localization has gotten so much better in the past decade or so, probably because of like localization pioneers like him. Like now we have people like our mutual friend Derek Heemsbergen. Shout out to Derek, who was one of the localization coordinators on the recent Doraemon Story of Seasons game. People that grew up appreciating good localization and maybe even hero worshipping people like Alexander O. Smith a little bit are now doing really good localization work. So now I think it's the best time ever to be playing translated games from Japanese creators now. But but as maybe the one of the very small number of celebrity localizers of that era, Smith has done a lot of incredible work, and that includes this game. Like the dialogue and place names in Vagrant Story are really cool. Like it's even the dialogue just in the very beginning of the game where they're introducing Ashley and all these characters and all this sort of palace intrigue. The good translated dialogue helps.
It totally does. Yeah. It's great. It's a great localization, and I love reading this game essentially.
And I also like how the font is a little unusual. It almost looks like script on a parchment, but not in a way that's ugly or gets in the way of enjoying the dialogue. And they did. There's a very concerted effort to time the speech bubbles and the movement of the dialogue with the movement of the character models. There's no voice acting in this game, I think. Right? Is there more
Nope.
that I'm missing? Yeah.
Yep, no voice acting.
Yeah, there's no voice acting in this game, but just the timing of the dialogue makes it feel like just a very well drawn comic strip. The way that they match dialogue with action very smartly.
Yeah, it's a little Alan Moore-esque in some ways.
Yeah, especially, well, I mean, the brilliant thing about Alan Moore's best works, like, your Watchmen's and your For the Man Who Has Everything's, is he's really good at balancing expository text with dialogue and like a lot of, for example, a lot of the comic Watchmen is told in newspaper clippings and like television interviews interspersed over action happening elsewhere. It's like Alan Moore is a brilliant comic storyteller. And Vagrant Story, I don't want to compare it to Alan Moore exactly, but it's even though there's no voice acting, which feels, not unforgivable, but it feels like a game of its time in that way. But the way it matches dialogue with action and the way the smart camera work communicates this action dramatically just makes it feel. It feels like good storytelling and good dialogue, in a way that is not always true of RPGs of the 2000s. If I'm talking about like Watchmen panel work, then maybe we're near the end of the episode. I think in the part 2, when I'm hopefully completed this game, we'll be able to talk about the story more in depth, especially the end game, because I definitely want to figure out what happens to Sydney and Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, to see if it's if they end up helpful companions like the Rosencrantz and Guildenstern of Lion King, which I'm pretty sure are supposed to be Timon and Pumbaa, or if we end like Tom Stoppard and Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are dead. There's a lot going on in Vagrant Story, and I've barely touched it, but hopefully when we are talking again next week, Joe, we'll be able to talk about the end game in greater detail. But for now, I think we're near the end of the episode. Thank you, listeners, for joining us in this journey into the early part of Vagrant Story, where there was, it sounded like we were complaining about the action and the weirdness of Vagrant Story a little bit, Joe. But I don't think there's really hate in either of our hearts right now. This is a cool, intriguing game that just has some obstacles in its combat and presentation.
Oh yeah, I hope it didn't come off that that I was hating on this game, because I think this game is fantastic. I'm really loving this game, kind of warts and frustrations and all. I'm
probably a little bit more frustrated than you, because I'm not ready to use the L word yet. But I'm extremely intrigued, and I really want to like this game. But from this game's reputation and from what you've told me, Joe, I'm definitely excited to continue, because this is a cool game with a lot of promise, but I'm really uncertain on how I feel about it right now. And I know that this podcast has even gotten complaints from readers for being overly negative, especially for the first year or two of us being around. And so I always want to balance criticism with positivity when I'm talking about a game, because I think that it's reductive to just be a hater, and a little boring to just shower a game with effusive praise. But this game has not earned hate yet from us. This is a game with some flaws, but is really cool. But is so cool and interesting with its premises that I'm excited to play more of it.
Yeah, I mean, this is RPG fan. We're not RPG haters or RPG critics, so
From
we're
some of
going
the
to.
from some of the fan mail we got from the early days of the podcast, you'd think we would be called RPG haters.
Well, the essential RPG battle that y'all had,
Oh, that.
that was pretty tense. So I could see it.
Yeah, I think I had to send Peter and Josh like some boxes of chocolates after that episode. Yeah, the postage to Michigan and Wisconsin was something I hadn't encountered before, but but yeah, I think we're done talking about Vagrant Story for the time being. Listeners, again, thank you for joining us on this journey that barely got to the first 3 hours of the game. We spent so much talking about the visual presentation and the combat in Vagrant Story, but I think part 2 will be much more story and much less mechanics. But I won't know until I get there, so you'll have to wait another week. But we have a lot of exciting stuff coming up in Retro Encounter. In December, we are going to be playing Ghost Trick over 2 episodes. Those are I have not started Ghost Trick yet because I still have Vagrant Story on my plate, but I love that game. I played it several years ago for the first time, but only the one time, so I'm really excited to revisit it. And we also have, in 2 weeks, I think, our quiz show episode. We had a quiz show episode in May of this year, and it was a lot of fun to record. And I was interested in doing a second one, and it was pretty easy finding some panelists on staff to play again. At least a couple in particular, one in particular told me that she got so mad listening to people get questions wrong that she had to volunteer for part 2. And I think you know who that is, Joe.
Perhaps.
So yeah, please look forward to Ghost Trick and a quiz show episode all coming in December. And while you're here with us at RPG Fan, please check out everything else the site has to offer. We have rpgfan.com, the main website, and it has forums, and a Twitter page, and a Facebook page, and an Instagram page, and a Discord server, and a Twitch channel with something streaming basically every day of the week, with a few exceptions. So, and also 3 other fine podcasts. Random Encounter, which is every other week and focuses mostly on randomness and current events. Rhythm Encounter, which takes place every... Yeah, Rhythm Encounter, our music podcast is on hiatus, but may come back yet later this year. And also Phoenix Edge, which is a recent addition to the RPG Fan podcast family, which focuses mostly on current events and is a weekly show hosted mostly and recorded live on YouTube. So yeah, please listen to Retro Encounter, of course, and also Random Encounter, Rhythm Encounter, and Phoenix Edge. So, Joe, if listeners want to get in touch with you directly, what's the best way for them to do so?
So you can find me on Twitter or on Discord as @QueersForFears. And I'm also on, I'm one of the social media people, so you can hit us up over on Facebook or Twitter, and I might be the person to respond to that.
Right on. And for me, the easiest way to find me is probably Twitter. I am @TheRealMonsoon most of the time, @EvokerForDogs other times. I'm also Monsoon Mike on Discord and Monsoon on the forums. And if you email us, the best way to contact the podcast is email retro@rpgfan.com. I am typically the person responding to that email. We have a lot to talk about in part 2, Joe, but that won't happen for another week.
We'll get through it, and we'll have an entire hour devoted to talking about how much Asumi Matsuno loves class warfare.
Oh, yeah. There is, I mean, geez, just between this and Final Fantasy Tactics, it's I don't think he has a lot of sympathy for the 1%.
No.
So to the 99% out there, thank you, good night, and good luck.